Some wounds never heal. Some burrow deeper, hiding in the dark, changing you in ways you can't see until it's too late. Ryan Mitchell thought September 12, 2005 was behind him. 19 years buried, 19 years silent. But on a sunny Sunday afternoon in Portland, one innocent observation from his 5-year-old granddaughter would rip open a secret he'd kept hidden since Hurricane Katrina. A secret that wasn't just eating away at his conscience, but at his very flesh. In an operating room at Oregon Health Science University, Dr. Sarah Chen held her forceps steady, staring at what she'd just removed from Ryan's neck. Green liquid dripped onto the sterile tray. A triangular shard of glass glinted under surgical lights, coated in something that pulsated like it was alive. 19 years. That's how long the glass had been waiting. What the doctors removed that day would change everything they thought they knew about survival. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Ryan Mitchell stood at the grill in his backyard, turning burgers with the practiced ease of a man who'd built a life on steady hands and careful measurements. At 50, he still carried himself like the structural engineer he was, tall, lean, movements economical. The September sun caught the gray threading through his brown hair, made his blue-green eyes squint against the smoke. "More corn, honey?" Claire called from the picnic table, her auburn hair catching silver highlights in the afternoon light. 28 years of marriage had taught her to read the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw set when memories he wouldn't share pressed too close to the surface. She'd been a teacher once, retired early to pursue watercolor painting. What Ryan didn't know, what she'd never told him, was that she'd been something else too. September 2005 had changed them both, left scars that didn't show. Their daughter Madison arrived late, as usual. At 25, she moved with the efficient grace of an ER physician perpetually behind schedule. Her ex-husband Brad followed with their daughter Sophie, a whirlwind of blonde curls and gap-toothed smiles. The divorce 6 months ago had carved a canyon between Madison and Ryan. He'd told her not to give up so easily. She'd stopped returning his calls. 17 missed calls, each one a small failure he carried in his chest alongside everything else he couldn't say. Sophie wore a bright red ladybug t-shirt, clutching her stuffed rabbit as she ran to Ryan. "Grandpa, can you help me tie my ribbon?" Ryan knelt on the grass, his joints protesting. Sophie's small fingers were sticky with lemonade as she held out a pink ribbon. He tied it carefully into her blonde curls, trying not to notice how Madison stood at the edge of the yard, arms crossed, looking everywhere but at him. "There you go, pumpkin," he said, straightening up. Sophie's hand reached out, touched the right side of his neck just below his ear. Her fingers were cool against his skin. "Grandpa," she said, tilting her head with the pure curiosity of a 5-year-old who said exactly what she saw. "Why do you have a ladybug on your neck?" The backyard went still. Claire's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Madison's head snapped toward her father. Brad froze with a burger suspended over the grill. Ryan forced a laugh that came out too tight. "Just a freckle, pumpkin. Had it for years." But Claire was already standing, moving toward him with the determination of a woman who'd noticed something wrong and ignored it for too long. Her artist's eye had seen the spot darkening over months, watched it change and told herself it was nothing. "Ryan," she said quietly, pulling out her iPhone. "Let me just take a picture." He wanted to refuse. Wanted to say it was fine. Dr. Walsh had checked it years ago, no need to worry on their anniversary. But something in Claire's face, fear mixed with recognition, made him nod. She zoomed in on the photo, her hand trembling. Then she showed Madison. Madison's clinical detachment lasted exactly 3 seconds. Her eyes scanned the image on her mother's phone with the trained precision of someone who'd seen too many cases go from routine to critical in the space of a heartbeat. "Dad," she said. and the word carried weight it hadn't held in 6 months. "When did this appear?" Ryan's jaw tightened. "It's been there for years." Dr. Walsh checked it. "Years?" Madison's voice rose slightly. "And you didn't think to mention it's changed?" The spot measured larger than a pencil eraser, its borders irregular like spider legs spreading across his neck. The colors troubled her most: dark brown bleeding into red, patches of black at the center, the edges inflamed and angry. The dome-shaped rise suggested something beneath the surface, something that had been growing. Claire scrolled through photos on her phone with shaking fingers, found a Christmas picture from 3 years ago. She zoomed in on Ryan's neck, visible in the background. The spot was there, but half the current size, lighter brown instead of the ominous red-black it had become. "This has doubled in 18 months, Brad observed quietly. He worked in tech, spent his days analyzing data and patterns. The overlay he created on his phone showed the progression with uncomfortable clarity. Sophie tugged on Ryan's sleeve. "Is Grandpa sick?" The questions silenced everyone. Ryan knelt again, pulled her into a hug that was more for him than for her. "Grandpa's fine, sweetheart." But over Sophie's blonde curls, his eyes met Claire's, and they both knew he was lying. "First thing Monday," Madison said, the doctor in her taking command. "You're seeing a dermatologist." "I have work." "Dad." Madison's tone left no room for argument. "This is serious." Claire touched his arm. "She's right, Ryan." He nodded slowly, and the barbecue ended with the kind of awkward dispersal that happens when fear enters a celebration uninvited. Madison hugged her mother, the first real warmth between them in months, and whispered, "He'll be okay, Mom." Claire couldn't respond. She'd seen wounds before, seen infections that started small and spread like wildfire. She'd seen them in New Orleans, in flooded houses and contaminated water, in a field hospital where she'd been someone else entirely. That night, after the dishes were done and the forced normalcy of their bedtime routine complete, Claire lay in the dark listening to Ryan's breathing. It was wrong somehow, the rhythm off, both of them awake and pretending not to be. "Claire?" His voice cut through the silence. "I'm awake." A long pause, then, "It hurts. Burns." She sat up, reached for the lamp. "Since when?" "Tonight. Since Sophie touched it." He turned his head on the pillow, and in the warm light she saw his fear, naked and raw. Like it's aware. Like something inside knows we know. Claire's hand trembled as she picked up her iPhone. "I'm going to film it while you sleep." "Why?" "For the doctor. We need documentation." She set the phone on the nightstand, angled to capture his neck, time-lapse mode. Then she sat back against the headboard, watching the small screen as Ryan finally drifted into restless sleep. For 20 minutes, nothing. Just the rise and fall of his breathing, the occasional twitch of muscle beneath skin. She was about to stop recording when she saw it. 12:17 a.m. The spot began to shift. Not the normal movement of skin over breath. This was something else, something underneath, a rhythmic pulsing every 7 or 8 seconds. The bandage she'd placed over it earlier rippled like something was breathing beneath it. A small dome rising, falling, rising again. Claire's hand flew to her mouth. She didn't wake him, didn't move, just sat frozen, watching through the phone screen as the thing in her husband's neck moved with a life of its own. When she finally touched it, had to know, had to feel, the skin was warm, warmer than it should be, and there was a smell, faint but unmistakable, like brackish water and decay. She stayed awake until dawn, keeping vigil over the man she'd loved for 28 years, watching the spot pulse with terrible regularity. In his sleep, Ryan muttered words she couldn't quite catch. Water rising. Can't reach them. The glass. Through the bedroom window she could see the garage, the gray toolbox visible on Ryan's workbench. She'd never asked about the combination lock, never pressed him about what he kept locked away. Some silences in a marriage, she'd learned, were their own kind of wound. As first light crept through the curtains, her phone buzzed. A text from Madison. "How is he?" Claire looked at her sleeping husband, at the video still recording on her phone, at the spot on his neck that held secrets neither of them had spoken aloud. She didn't know how to answer. The call came at 6:45 a.m., while Claire was staring into her coffee cup, trying to convince herself the night had been a product of exhaustion and fear. Dr. Sarah Chen's voice on the phone was professionally calm, but Claire heard the undercurrent of urgency. "Dr. Walsh sent me your husband's images last night. I had a cancellation. Can you come at 10:30? Claire knew what that meant. Dr. Chen was booked 3 months out. Nobody cleared their schedule unless something was very wrong. Ryan woke to Claire's hand on his shoulder. The spot was visibly more inflamed than the night before, the skin around it tight and shiny. When he touched it, he winced. "Feels full," he said quietly. "Like there's pressure inside." He dropped his coffee mug, getting dressed, something Ryan never did. His hands trembled slightly as he picked up the pieces, and Claire pretended not to notice. She showed him the time-lapse video, watched his face drain of color as the spot pulsed on the screen, that rhythmic movement at 2:17 a.m. unmistakable in the phone's harsh light. "It's just muscle twitching," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Camera angle." Claire played it again and again. By the third viewing, Ryan's engineering mind, trained to see structural failures, to identify problems before they became catastrophes, couldn't deny what was in front of him. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. Portland Dermatology occupied a renovated building in the Pearl District, all exposed brick and modern fixtures. Ryan filled out forms with unusual hesitation, his hand hovering over family history of skin cancer. He left it blank, a detail Claire filed away. He'd been adopted, she remembered, never knew his biological parents. Dr. Sarah Chen was a woman in her early 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a manner that balanced warmth with clinical precision. 20 years of practice had shown her almost everything, until she examined Ryan's neck. Her professional mask slipped for just a microsecond, a tightening around her eyes, an intake of breath. The spot measured 2.5 centimeters, the size of a quarter. Its borders were wildly asymmetrical, stretching like roots into the surrounding skin. The domed center showed multiple colors: red, dark brown, black, and in certain light an unsettling hint of green. The skin around it radiated red lines that suggested lymphatic involvement. She leaned in with her dermatoscope, the illuminated magnifier that revealed what the naked eye missed. Then she pulled back suddenly, her brow furrowed. "That's unusual," she said carefully. "What is it?" Claire's voice was steady, but her hand found Ryan's. "The structure. It's not like typical melanoma." Through the dermatoscope, she'd seen geometric patterns, almost crystalline, and something that caught the light in a way skin tissue shouldn't. For a moment, she could have sworn she saw a movement, but that was impossible. Claire showed her the time-lapse video. Dr. Chen watched in silence, then replayed it 3 times, making notes on her tablet. "Has anything like this happened before?" "No, never. I need to take a sample." Dr. Chen prepared the local anesthetic, but when the needle penetrated the tissue, Ryan cried out. A sharp, agonized sound that made everyone in the room freeze. "It feels like you're hitting bone." His knuckles were white where he gripped the examination table. "That's impossible," Dr. Chen said quietly. "There's no bone there." But the tissue was impossibly dense. The biopsy punch met resistance, and when the sample finally came free, it was the wrong color. Normal skin tissue showed pink and red. This was pale with a greenish tinge that made Dr. Chen's hand shake slightly as she placed it in the specimen container. In 20 years of dermatology, she'd never seen anything like it. "I'm sending this stat to pathology, and I want you to get a CT scan today." She wrote on her prescription pad, then did something she rarely did, wrote her personal cell number. "If anything changes, call me immediately." Ryan's voice was hoarse. "Is it cancer?" Dr. Chen met his eyes. "I don't know what it is. That's what concerns me." The CT imaging center was across town. Ryan lay in the machine's cylindrical tunnel, trying to hold still while his mind raced through every possibility, none of them good. Through the window, he could see Claire watching, her artist's hands pressed against the glass. The technician's professional poker face cracked when the images loaded. "I need to call the radiologist." Dr. James Morrison had 30 years of experience reading scans. He came out personally to meet them, which was never a good sign. "Mr. Mitchell, there's a foreign object in your neck." The words hung in the air. Ryan felt his throat tighten. "What kind of object?" "Dense, triangular, approximately 8 millimeters, surrounded by an encapsulated mass, roughly 2.5 centimeters. The images showed it clearly. A dark triangle at the center, wrapped in a lighter mass that extended thin tendrils into the surrounding tissue. Like roots, Claire thought. Like something that had been growing there for a very long time. "Any history of trauma to the neck?" Dr. Morrison asked. Ryan's mind went blank, then reached back through years. "No, I don't think so." "Foreign travel? Unusual infections?" "Just—" Ryan's voice caught. "New Orleans, 2005, after Katrina." Claire's head snapped toward him. In 28 years of marriage, she could count on one hand the number of times he'd mentioned those 2 weeks. The canyon between what they'd shared and what they'd hidden suddenly felt vast. Dr. Morrison was already on the phone. "Dr. Reynolds, I'm sending you images now. You need to see this." The office of Dr. Marcus Reynolds occupied the top floor of Oregon Health Science University, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Portland's West Hills. The walls displayed credentials that spoke of a career spent chasing rare diseases and post-disaster infections, a specialty born from too many humanitarian missions to places where nature and human catastrophe collided. Dr. Reynolds himself was a man in his late 50s with graying temples and the kind of calm authority that came from having seen the worst and learned not to flinch. He studied Ryan across his desk with eyes that missed nothing. "I've treated 47 Katrina survivors," he said without preamble. "Respiratory infections, skin conditions, PTSD-related complications. But I've never seen anything quite like this." The CT images filled the screen behind him. He used a laser pointer to trace the triangular object at the center. "This is clearly man-made, glass most likely, based on the density. Your body encapsulated it, built a protective barrier around a foreign invader." "How long has it been there?" Claire asked. "These tendrils." Dr. Reynolds zoomed in on the thread-like extensions. "They have their own blood supply. That takes time to develop." "Years, certainly. Possibly many years." Ryan's throat felt tight. "The spot only appeared 5 or 6 years ago." "The spot is just what reached the surface. This has been growing much longer." Dr. Reynolds pulled up the preliminary pathology report from Dr. Chen's biopsy. His brow furrowed. "Atypical melanoma markers, but also signs of chronic infection. And something else I can't immediately identify." Claire's voice was steady despite the fear threading through it. "The tissue was greenish." "Yes, that's concerning. It suggests bacterial colonization." Dr. Reynolds typed rapidly, pulling up reference images. Tell me about your time in New Orleans. Specifically, any injuries involving broken glass or contaminated water. Ryan's jaw worked. He'd buried those 2 weeks so deep that excavating them felt like opening a grave. I was doing structural assessments, search and rescue. There was a lot of broken glass, a lot of flood water. I had some cuts. Did you receive medical treatment? A pause. Some field hospital? Nothing formal. Dr. Reynolds leaned forward. Mr. Mitchell, Katrina's floodwater was a perfect breeding ground for dangerous bacteria. When saltwater storm surge mixed with sewage, chemicals, and runoff from the Gulf, it created conditions we rarely see. Vibrio vulnificus, flesh-eating bacteria, thrives in that environment. Claire felt ice in her chest. She'd seen Vibrio infections in the field hospital, watched them spread with terrifying speed. We need to rule out several possibilities, Dr. Reynolds continued. I'm ordering additional scans and cultures. But given the movement your wife documented, he pulled up Claire's time-lapse video, watched the pulsing with clinical fascination. This is behaving like it's active, not dormant. Something has triggered it. Triggered what? Ryan's voice was rough. We won't know until we get more data, but I can give you 3 options. Dr. Reynolds counted on his fingers. 1. Watch and wait. Monitor with regular scans. 2. Surgical removal of the object, capsule, and affected tissue. 3. Another biopsy for bacterial culture, then surgery with appropriate antibiotics. What do you recommend? Dr. Reynolds didn't hesitate. Surgery, as soon as possible. This spot has been stable for years, and suddenly it's mobile, growing, causing pain. That suggests the encapsulation is failing. If it ruptures internally, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. When? Claire asked. Day after tomorrow, September 18th, 8 a.m. I'm clearing my schedule. The speed of it sent a chill through the room. Ryan signed consent forms with a hand that shook slightly, acknowledging risks of death, nerve damage, infection. The irony of that last one wasn't lost on anyone. As they left, Dr. Reynolds walked them to the elevator. His hand on Ryan's shoulder carried unexpected weight. How long were you in New Orleans? 2 weeks. You did good work there. Let's make sure it doesn't cost you your life. Madison was waiting in their driveway when they got home, still in scrubs from her shift. She'd gotten Claire's text with updates and come straight over. Why didn't you tell me you were in Katrina? The question erupted before Ryan was fully out of the car. It was before you were born. I'm a doctor, Dad. This could have been prevented. Her voice cracked on the last word. They stood in the driveway, 19 years of silence, suddenly too heavy to carry. Ryan's face hardened. You think I wanted this? You hide everything, the spot, Katrina, everything. I was protecting you. From what? The truth? Claire stepped between them. Both of you, stop. But Madison was beyond stopping, 6 months of estrangement finding a target. Is this why you told me not to give up on my marriage? Because you're so good at holding things together while they rot from the inside? Ryan stood, and for a moment he looked older than his 50 years. Your marriage failed because you gave up too easily. And you'll die before you admit you need help. The words hung like a slap. Claire's voice cut through, sharp and final. Enough! Madison fled to the kitchen. Claire found her there, angry tears streaming down her face. I can't lose him, Mom. Not like this. Claire pulled her daughter close. Then don't push him away when he needs you most. He pushed me away first. No, honey. He loved you so much he couldn't watch you hurt. When you got divorced, it killed him. He just didn't know how to say it. Madison's breathing steadied. That's not love. That's control. Sometimes, Claire said quietly. They're the same thing. And sometimes we do both, because we don't know any better. She paused, then made a decision that had been building since she saw that spot on Ryan's neck. There's something you don't know. About me. About your father. Madison looked up, wiping her eyes. I was in New Orleans, too. The kitchen went silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. What? Claire's voice was steady now, unburdening a secret she'd carried as long as Ryan had carried his. September 2005. I was a volunteer battlefield nurse. That's where I really learned medicine, before I ever taught school. I treated dozens of people, cuts, infections, broken bones. There was one man. She paused, seeing it again in her mind's eye. He wouldn't stop working. Had a deep cut on his neck from broken glass. I bandaged it, told him he needed proper stitches and antibiotics. He said he'd go tomorrow. He never did. Madison's medical mind was already working. Dad? I didn't know. Not until yesterday, when he mentioned Katrina. We met there, Maddie, and neither of us knew it. A cut from contaminated glass in that water. Madison's face went pale. Mom, Vibrio, Pseudomonas, Clostridium. If he didn't get proper antibiotics, those bacteria could have been dormant for 19 years. Claire nodded. That's what Dr. Reynolds thinks. They returned to the living room together. Ryan was sitting on the couch, staring at old photo albums, and something in his posture, defeat mixed with resignation, made Madison's anger dissolve. Dad, I'm sorry. He looked up and she saw tears he was too proud to shed. I'm sorry too, sweetheart. They hugged, really hugged, for the first time in 6 months. Over her shoulder, Ryan's voice was thick. I should have told you everything. Tell me now, Madison said. And so he did. They sat together, Ryan, Claire, Madison, as rain began to patter against the windows. Ryan's voice was halting at first, then stronger as the story poured out of him like poison from a wound. September 12th, 2005. He was 31, newly married. Claire 6 weeks pregnant, though they'd only just found out. The news showed New Orleans underwater, people trapped, dying. He'd told Claire he had to go, that they needed structural engineers to assess which buildings were safe to enter. He worked with search and rescue teams for 4 days before the call came. Family trapped on the 2nd floor, water rising, house in the 9th ward. Ryan was the lightest, so he went first. Took a hammer, broke through a window to reach them. There was glass everywhere, he said, his voice distant. In the dark water you couldn't see it. I didn't even feel the cut. Too much adrenaline. Just noticed when someone shouted that I was bleeding. He'd gotten the family out, a mother and 2 children, hypothermic and terrified. The mother hadn't wanted to leave, kept saying her husband was downstairs, but Ryan convinced her the water was too contaminated, that staying meant death. After we got them on the boat, someone looked at my neck, said I needed stitches. I said later, asked where the next call was. He touched his neck unconsciously. I worked 8 more hours before I went to the field hospital. Claire's hand found his, squeezed. She knew what came next, though she'd never connected it to the man she'd married a year later. There was a nurse. She cleaned the wound, butterfly bandages, told me I needed proper stitches and antibiotics. I said I'd get them tomorrow. Ryan's voice broke slightly. I never did. Why not? Madison asked, though she thought she knew. Too much work. Too many people needing help. Then I came home and Claire was having pregnancy complications. The doctor said stress could cause a miscarriage. He looked at his wife. I didn't want to add to your worry. The wound seemed to heal, so I just didn't mention it. For 19 years, Claire said softly. I thought I was protecting you, protecting the pregnancy. It seemed so small compared to keeping you both safe. His eyes found Madison. You were born healthy. That's all that mattered. Madison was quiet for a long moment. Dad, the family you saved, what happened to them? I don't know. We didn't exchange information. It was chaos. But you saved them. Maybe. Or maybe I just delayed the inevitable. Claire's voice was firm. That's the trauma talking. Ryan's eyes were haunted. Is it? I couldn't save everyone. Some houses we got there too late. I can still hear them calling. The nightmares, he admitted, had never stopped. Water rising, glass breaking. Voices he couldn't reach. And now I know why my neck always hurt in the dreams. It was trying to tell me something. The clock struck 11:45. Ryan stood slowly, wincing. The gray toolbox in the garage. Combination 0912. September 12th, Claire said. The day I should have died but didn't. If something happens in surgery, nothing will happen. But if it does, there's a letter. Read it. You'll understand. Claire promised, though her throat was tight with unshed tears. That night, Madison couldn't sleep. She researched Vibrio vulnificus cases on her laptop, finding 11 documented deaths post-Katrina. Mortality rate 30 to 40%. Incubation period usually 12 to 72 hours. But chronic dormant infections had been documented up to 5 years. 19 years. No cases in the medical literature. Her father could be a medical first or a medical death. The next day was a blur of preoperative procedures, blood work, bacterial cultures, fungal panels, heavy metal screening. More tests than the phlebotomist had ever drawn for a single patient. At 3 p.m., Dr. Reynolds called with preliminary culture results. The conference call included Dr. Chen and an infectious disease specialist. Their voices were carefully neutral, which made it worse. We found something unexpected in the biopsy culture, Dr. Reynolds said. Vibrio vulnificus is present, but mostly dead cells. Pseudomonas aeruginosa, also mostly dormant. But there's an unknown bacterial species that's very much active. Active? Ryan's voice was tight. It's forming what we call a biofilm, a protective barrier bacteria create. It's why they're so hard to kill with antibiotics. This biofilm appears to have been there for years, possibly decades. Claire felt the world tilt. What does that mean for surgery? It means we need to operate with full infection protocols, and it means recovery will be complicated. When we remove the object, we may release bacteria that have been dormant for nearly 2 decades. Ryan asked the question they were all thinking. What if you don't operate? What if you leave it? A long pause. Mr. Mitchell, that spot is mobile. The capsule is degrading. Eventually, it will rupture on its own, and the infection would be massive, unsurvivable. So the surgery might kill me, or waiting will definitely kill me. Those are the odds. That evening, Claire made pot roast, Ryan's favorite. Madison brought Sophie and Brad. It was the first time in 6 months they'd all sat together, the weight of what was coming forcing them into proximity. Sophie chattered happily, oblivious, asking if Grandpa could have ice cream after his surgery. All the ice cream you want, Pumpkin, Ryan promised. Later, after Sophie was asleep and Brad had taken her home, Madison stayed. She found her parents in the living room, neither able to sleep. At 2 a.m., Claire finally voiced her fear. I'm scared. Me too, Ryan admitted. They held each other in the dark, and Claire whispered against his shoulder. When did we really meet? Tell me the truth. Ryan's voice was soft. September 12, 2005. I just didn't know it yet. The pre-op holding area at Oregon Health Science University smelled of antiseptic and fear masked by clinical efficiency. Ryan sat on the gurney in a hospital gown, an IV port already placed in his arm, trying not to think about the consent forms he'd signed an hour earlier. The risks had been listed in careful legal language, but they all meant the same thing. This could kill him. Claire held his hand, her artist's fingers tracing the lines of his palm like she was memorizing them. Madison stood nearby in borrowed scrubs, unable to operate on her own father but refusing to be anywhere else. The anesthesiologist reviewed the charts one final time. "Any last questions?" Ryan shook his head. Words felt inadequate for what he needed to say. Claire leaned down, kissed his forehead. Her lips trembled against his skin. "Come back to me." "Always," he whispered. Madison squeezed his other hand, her professional composure cracking. "Dad, I know, sweetheart." "Me too." The nurse checked her watch. "It's time, Mr. Mitchell." Ryan's last words before the sedative took hold were directed at Claire. "The combination 0912, don't forget." Then to Madison, his voice already slurring, "Make them save the scans. This might help someone else someday." The world faded to white. In operating room 3, Dr. Marcus Reynolds stood over the draped form of his patient, surrounded by a team that represented the best OHSU had to offer. Dr. Sarah Chen had scrubbed in for her dermatological expertise. Dr. Patricia Okoye, an infectious disease specialist, stood ready with cultures and antibiotics. 2 surgical nurses moved with practiced efficiency. A medical student observed from the corner, wide-eyed. "Scalpel," Dr. Reynolds said, and the surgery began. The initial incision followed standard protocol, a clean, curved line along the right side of Ryan's neck. But within seconds, Dr. Reynolds frowned. The bleeding pattern was wrong, the tissue more vascular than the CT scans had suggested. "Suction. I need better visibility." As they cut deeper, a smell emerged from the wound. Not the typical metallic scent of surgery, but something organic and ancient. Like salt water left too long in the sun, like decay wrapped in brine. Dr. Okoye's nose wrinkled behind her mask. "That's unusual. That's New Orleans," Dr. Reynolds muttered, working carefully through layers of tissue. By 9:15, the mass was visible, a dome-shaped structure that shouldn't exist in human anatomy. It was integrated into the muscle tissue in a way that made Dr. Reynolds' experienced hands pause. This wasn't something that could simply be lifted out. It had roots. The CT scan had shown tendrils, but the images hadn't captured how deep they went. Thread-like extensions reached into the sternocleidomastoid muscle, wrapping perilously close to the carotid artery. One wrong cut could cause a stroke. Another could sever the vagus nerve and leave Ryan unable to speak. Dr. Reynolds worked millimeter by millimeter, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool operating room. The medical student leaned in for a better view and gasped softly. "Doctor, is that moving?" Every eye in the room focused on the exposed capsule. It pulsed with a rhythm that matched the patient's heartbeat, but seemed somehow independent. The surface rippled like something breathing. "Vascular pulsation," Dr. Reynolds said, but his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. 2 hours into the surgery, they reached a decision point. The capsule was partially freed, but the final attachments sat directly against the carotid artery. Continuing meant risking catastrophic bleeding. Stopping meant leaving the very thing that was killing Ryan Mitchell inside his body. Dr. Reynolds looked at Dr. Chen across the operating table. "Your patient. Your call." Dr. Chen's eyes were steady above her mask. We finish this. If we leave it, it kills him anyway. The final dissection required microscopic instruments and a nerve that came from somewhere beyond training. The medical student monitoring vitals called out numbers that made everyone's pulse quicken. Heart rate increasing, 95, 100, 105, blood pressure dropping. "He's reacting to the manipulation," Dr. Reynolds said quietly. "His body knows what we're doing." At 11:32 a.m., he severed the last tendril. The capsule came free in his forceps, heavier than it should be, still dome-shaped and covered in a greenish, translucent coating that caught the surgical lights in unsettling ways. "Specimen container. Now." Dr. Chen held out the sterile tray, and Dr. Reynolds placed the capsule down with a care usually reserved for something alive. In a sense, it had been. Dr. Chen took a fresh scalpel and carefully incised the capsule. Thick greenish liquid oozed out, and a nurse quickly drew a sample with a syringe. Inside were layers, concentric rings like an organic pearl, each one a year of Ryan's bodybuilding defenses around what it couldn't expel. At the center, Dr. Chen's forceps closed on something solid. She pulled out a triangular piece of glass, 8 millimeters wide, its edges still sharp after 19 years. It was covered in a coating that seemed almost alive, glistening under the lights, moving in ways that had nothing to do with the forceps holding it. The room went silent except for the beep of monitors and the hiss of the ventilator. "What is that?" the medical student whispered. Dr. Reynolds studied the glass shard with fascination and horror. "That's 19 years of survival." The coating writhed as oxygen hit it. Bacteria dying in real time, their protective environment suddenly gone. Green liquid dripped onto the tray in slow, viscous drops. But the real shock came when they looked at the cavity where the capsule had been. The surrounding tissue was pulling together, edges moving inward like the body was trying to rebuild what had been taken. Muscle fibers reached toward each other with a determination that defied normal healing. "That's impossible," Dr. Okoye breathed. "Get pictures," Dr. Reynolds ordered. "Document everything." They irrigated the wound with antibiotic solution, placed deep sutures and surface sutures, bandaged the site with meticulous care. Ryan's vitals slowly stabilized. "Let's get him to recovery." In the surgical waiting room, Claire and Madison sat in chairs they'd worn smooth with nervous shifting. When Dr. Reynolds emerged, still in his surgical cap, both women stood so quickly they nearly knocked over their coffee cups. "The surgery went as well as could be expected," he said. Claire heard the "but" before he said it. "But there were complications we didn't anticipate." He pulled out his tablet, showed them photos that would haunt their dreams. The capsule with its concentric layers. The glass shard coated in bacterial film. The tendrils reaching deep into muscle tissue. Madison, with her medical training, went pale. How did his body not reject that years ago? That's what's remarkable. Your husband's body didn't reject it. It accommodated it. Dr. Reynolds swiped to a microscopic image. It created a multi-layered encapsulation system, not just to protect him from the glass and bacteria, but to maintain them in a dormant state. Claire struggled to understand. So removing it was dangerous. Removing it was necessary. But yes. Dr. Reynolds's expression was grave. The capsule was filtering toxins for 19 years. It was like a biological dialysis system, a prison and a life support mechanism at once. His body built something I've never seen in 3 decades of medicine. And now? Madison's voice was barely audible. Now the bacteria are exposed. Some died when they hit oxygen, but others are in his tissue, and they've been dormant for nearly 2 decades. The next 48 hours are critical. We'll know if the antibiotics work, or if we woke something we can't control. Madison looked at the lab slip Dr. Reynolds handed her, saw the bacterial concentration in the capsule fluid, and her hand shook. That concentration should have killed him years ago. Exactly, but it didn't. The biofilm kept them dormant, until we disrupted it. The irony settled over them like a shroud. In trying to save Ryan Mitchell's life, they might have ended it. Ryan was moved to the ICU, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed and breathed for him. Claire took up residence in the chair beside his bed, refusing all suggestions that she go home and rest. Madison camped in the waiting room, her laptop open to medical journals she could barely focus on. Both women watched the clock. Both prayed to gods they weren't sure they believed in. And both waited to see if the man they loved would wake up, or if the glass from New Orleans would finally claim the life it had been owed for 19 years. Ryan woke at 8 in the morning, groggy and confused, his throat raw from the breathing tube. Claire was there instantly, her hand finding his, her face exhausted but radiant with relief. "You're okay. Surgery's over." His first word hoarse and barely audible. "Sophie?" "She's fine. Everyone's fine." "The glass?" His hand moved weakly toward his neck, found bandages. "They got it." Claire's voice broke on the words. For the first 24 hours, everything seemed manageable. Ryan's vitals were stable. The pain was controlled with medication. By noon, he was eating ice chips, and when Madison visited that afternoon, father and daughter shared a moment of quiet understanding that needed no words. "You scared me, Dad." "Scared myself, kiddo." That evening, Ryan asked about the toolbox. Claire smiled, squeezed his hand. "Not yet. You're here. You can tell me yourself when you're ready." He was too tired to argue, drifting in and out of sleep while Claire kept watch from her bedside chair. At 11 o'clock that night, the night nurse took his temperature during routine vitals check, 99.1 degrees Fahrenheit. Slightly elevated, but within the range of normal post-surgical inflammation. She made a note in the chart and continued her rounds. At midnight, Ryan began thrashing in his sleep, caught in a nightmare he couldn't escape. "The water! Get them out! The glass! I can see the glass!" The monitors alarmed. Claire jerked awake, called for the nurse. Ryan wouldn't respond to her voice, trapped in memories of New Orleans, of rising water and breaking glass and voices calling for help he couldn't give. His temperature had climbed to 100.4 degrees. By 2 in the morning, the fever spiked to 102.8 and was rising fast. Ryan was conscious but confused, his eyes unfocused. "Where's the family?" "Did we get them out?" He was reliving September 12, 2005, his mind unable to distinguish between then and now. Claire gripped his hand. "Ryan, you're in Portland. You're safe. The water's rising. I can feel it." The nurse removed his bandage and went very still. The wound was swollen and angry red, the edges pulling apart slightly. Drainage seeped through, yellow-green and foul-smelling, that same brackish odor from the operating room. She called the resident immediately. Dr. Emily Foster, a surgical resident with dark circles under her eyes from a 30-hour shift, examined the wound under bright lights. The diagnosis was immediate and terrifying. "This is cellulitis, progressing rapidly." She started broad-spectrum IV antibiotics and called Dr. Reynolds at home. He arrived at 3:15 in the morning, wearing pajamas under his white coat, his face grim. Ryan's temperature had climbed to 103.5 degrees. Red streaks radiated from the incision site, lymphangitis, the infection spreading through his lymphatic system. "This is what I was afraid of," Dr. Reynolds said quietly. In the hallway, he explained to Claire and Madison, who'd arrived within minutes of the emergency call. "The dormant bacteria are waking up. They were protected in the biofilm for years. Now they're exposed to blood supply. They're multiplying." Madison's medical training kicked in past her fear. The antibiotics we chose, are they covering Vibrio? Dr. Reynolds checked the chart. Yes, but biofilm-encased bacteria need 100 times the normal antibiotic dose to penetrate. Their eyes met in shared understanding. We need to change the protocol. Now. Dr. Reynolds hesitated. Higher doses mean higher risk of kidney damage. Lower doses, he dies from sepsis. Claire's voice cut through steady, despite the terror underneath. What would you do if it was your father, doctor? Reynolds was quiet for a long moment. Then, I'd try to save him. He ordered maximum dose antibiotic cocktail, a combination powerful enough to kill bacteria or kidneys, whichever came first. But at 4 o'clock, despite the antibiotics flooding his system, Ryan's fever climbed to 104.2 degrees. He drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling words that broke Claire's heart. Tell Claire I'm sorry. Tell Madison. Claire leaned close, tears streaming down her face. You tell them yourself. Stay with me, Ryan. Please, stay with me. At 4:30, Dr. Reynolds ordered an emergency ultrasound. The portable machine was wheeled to Ryan's bedside, and they all watched the screen as the technician moved the probe over his neck. There, a dark pocket of fluid deep in the tissue, an abscess forming where the capsule had been removed. Dr. Reynolds turned to Claire with the kind of gravity that preceded impossible choices. The infection is creating an abscess. If it bursts internally, bacteria will flood his bloodstream. Septic shock. He won't survive it. Claire already knew what was coming. I need to operate again. Drain it. Clean the wound thoroughly. But his body just went through major surgery yesterday. Another operation so soon. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. What are his chances without surgery? Near zero. And with surgery? Better than zero. Claire's hand shook so badly when she signed the consent form that she could barely write her name. Madison reached to help, but Claire shook her head. No, I'm his wife. This is mine to bear. At 5:45, as they prepped Ryan for emergency surgery, he surfaced briefly into lucidity. He saw Claire crying and managed a weak smile. Hey, no tears. Ryan, they have to operate again. I know. I heard. His hand found her face, thumb brushing away tears. The toolbox, 0912. Read it now. You'll read it to me yourself. Maybe, but just in case. His eyes held hers. I love you. I love you too. Come back to me. I'll try. While Ryan was in surgery for the second time in 2 days, Claire finally broke. Madison found her in the hospital chapel, sobbing into her hands with a grief that had been building for 19 years. I can't lose him, Maddie. I can't. You won't. Dad's strong. What if strong isn't enough? Madison pulled her mother close, and they cried together, both terrified of a future that suddenly felt very possible, a world without Ryan Mitchell in it. At 7 in the morning, they drove home to the garage. The gray toolbox sat on the workbench exactly where it always had, keeping Ryan's secrets locked behind a combination that represented the worst day of his life. Claire's fingers trembled on the dial. 0912. Click, 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 click. Inside were dog tags from volunteer rescue work. A commendation ribbon. A photograph of Ryan at 31, covered in mud, holding a little girl who was crying, and a stack of letters, rubber-banded together. On top, in Ryan's careful handwriting, to Madison, my unborn daughter. Claire and Madison read together, tears falling on words written 19 years ago by a man who knew he was hurt but chose silence as an act of love. Chose his wife's peace over his pain, chose his unborn daughter over himself. He knew, Madison whispered. Even then, he knew something was wrong. Claire's phone rang. The hospital. Surgery's done, Dr. Reynolds said. We drained the abscess. Large amount of infected fluid. The tissue underneath required more removal than I hoped. Muscle tissue, some nerve. Will he? Claire couldn't finish. He's alive, critical but stable. They drove back through Portland's morning traffic, holding on to those two words like a lifeline. Alive, stable. It would have to be enough. The conference room on the 4th floor of OHSU smelled like stale coffee and exhaustion. Dr. Reynolds sat at the head of the table, flanked by Dr. Chen and Dr. Okoye with lab reports and microscopy images spread before them like evidence at a trial. Claire and Madison sat across from them, neither having slept in 48 hours, both too wired on fear and caffeine to care. We have results from the capsule fluid and tissue cultures, Dr. Reynolds began. His tone carried the weight of someone about to deliver news that would rewrite medical textbooks. Dr. Okoye opened her laptop, turned it so everyone could see the bacterial analysis. We found 3 distinct bacterial species. Vibrio vulnificus, 85% dead, 15% dormant. Pseudomonas aeruginosa, 70% dead, 30% dormant. And an unknown species we're still sequencing. That one is 100% active. The unknown bacteria is what's causing the current infection, Dr. Chen added. It's aggressive and resistant to standard antibiotics, but the biofilm itself. She pulled up microscopic images that looked more like abstract art than biology. This is what's truly remarkable. The images showed layers upon layers, like sedimentary rock or tree rings. The outermost layer contained calcium deposits, almost bone-like in density. Middle layers were typical biofilm, proteins and polysaccharides that bacteria produced to protect their colonies. But the innermost layer made Dr. Chen shake her head in wonder. This inner structure is unlike anything in current medical literature. It appears to have been regulating bacterial growth, keeping them dormant but alive, filtering the toxins they produced. Madison leaned forward, her medical training trying to process what she was hearing. What does that mean? It means the biofilm wasn't just protecting your father from the bacteria. It was protecting the bacteria from your father's immune system. And in doing so, it accidentally kept him alive. The words settled over the room like fallout. Claire's voice was barely audible. From the bacteria? Dr. Reynolds took over, his hands steepled in front of him. Here's our reconstruction of what happened. September 12, 2005. Glass cuts through contaminated floodwater. Week 1, bacteria colonize the wound. Week 2, Mr. Mitchell's immune system encapsulates the infection rather than fighting it directly. Month 1, biofilm formation begins. Year 1, the capsule stabilizes. Years 2 through 19, equilibrium, a biological stalemate. Your husband's body created something unprecedented, Dr. Chen said. A symbiotic prison. The bacteria were contained but kept alive. The biofilm filtered their toxins so they didn't kill him, and in return they remained dormant, not triggering a full immune response that would have caused massive inflammation. The ironic truth hit Madison like a physical blow. So the biofilm was keeping the bacteria from killing him? Exactly. And by removing it, we disrupted 19 years of biological equilibrium. Dr. Reynolds' expression was grave. We triggered the crisis we thought we were preventing. Claire's voice shook. You mean the surgery made it worse? The surgery was necessary, Dr. Reynolds said carefully. The capsule was degrading on its own. That movement your wife documented? That was the beginning of failure. If we hadn't removed it, it would have ruptured within weeks, maybe days. the infection would have been catastrophic and unsurvivable. But yes, Dr. Chen added quietly, in trying to save him, we nearly killed him. The body is sometimes smarter than medicine. It built a solution. We dismantled it. Dr. Okoye pulled up treatment protocols. Now we fight the infection we released. We're using a combination of antibiotics specifically targeted at the bacteria we've identified. But the unknown species is concerning. Until we complete the DNA sequencing, we're treating it empirically. The next 2 days passed in a blur of machines and monitors, of nurses checking vitals every hour, of Madison researching medical journals in the waiting room while Claire kept vigil at Ryan's bedside. He remained in a medically induced coma on a ventilator, his fever stubbornly hovering at 103 degrees, despite maximum antibiotic doses. On the evening of September 21st, Madison burst into Dr. Reynolds' office with her laptop. Hyperbaric oxygen therapy for Vibrio infections. Dr. Reynolds looked up from his charts. HBO therapy in his condition? It's been used successfully in necrotizing fasciitis cases. Pure oxygen at high pressure kills anaerobic bacteria. Her eyes were wild with hope and desperation. It could work. Moving him, the pressure changes in his current state. Is it riskier than watching him die? Dr. Reynolds studied the young doctor in front of him, saw her father's determination in the set of her jaw, and made the call. The hyperbaric chamber looked like something from a submarine, a pressurized steel cylinder with small windows. Ryan was transported with extreme care, monitors and IV lines trailing like lifelines. Claire watched through the thick glass as oxygen flooded the chamber, as the pressure increased to 2.5 times normal atmospheric levels. For 90 minutes she watched her husband's unconscious form, praying to a God she'd stopped believing in somewhere between the field hospitals of New Orleans and the operating rooms of Portland. When he emerged, his color was better. His oxygen saturation had improved. It was a small victory, but in the landscape of critical care, small victories were everything. September 22nd dawned with the kind of hope that felt dangerous to acknowledge. At 6 in the morning, the night nurse noted that Ryan's fever had broken overnight. 98.9 degrees, the first normal reading in 3 days. Dr. Reynolds examined the wound at 7 and allowed himself a cautious smile. The redness was receding. The drainage had decreased and cleared. The angry inflammation that had threatened to consume Ryan's neck was finally responding to treatment. "I'll be damned," he muttered. "It's working." At 10 o'clock, they reduced the sedation. Ryan began to stir, his eyes moving beneath closed lids, his fingers twitching. Claire leaned close, her voice breaking. "Ryan, can you hear me?" His hand squeezed hers, weak but deliberate. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused but aware. He tried to speak around the breathing tube, made a frustrated sound. "Don't talk. You're okay. You're going to be okay." At 2 in the afternoon, they removed the breathing tube. Ryan coughed, disoriented, his throat raw. His first word was exactly what Claire expected. "Sophie?" She laughed and cried at the same time. "She's fine. She's been so worried about you." "How long?" 4 days, since the first surgery. Ryan processed this, his engineer's mind trying to calculate what he'd missed. "I feel like I got hit by a truck." Madison appeared in the doorway, still in her scrubs. "You pretty much did, Dad." That evening, when Sophie was finally allowed to visit, she ran to his bedside with Mr. Hoppy clutched in one hand. "Grandpa, you're awake." Ryan smiled, weak but genuine. "Hey, Pumpkin. Did the doctors find the ladybug?" The adults in the room laughed, tension breaking like a fever. "They did, and they got rid of it." "Good. I didn't like that ladybug." After Sophie left with Brad, Ryan looked at Claire and Madison with an expression of someone who knew he'd been somewhere close to death and found his way back. "Tell me everything." They explained the biofilm, the bacteria, the terrible irony of a body that had saved itself by making peace with its enemy. Ryan listened in silence, processing information that redefined 19 years of his life. "So my body was protecting them?" "And protecting you from them," Madison said. "For 19 years." Claire's voice was soft. "For 19 years." Ryan's hand went to his bandaged neck. "I felt it sometimes. Thought I was crazy. You weren't. It was alive in there, in a way. All that time, carrying New Orleans inside me." His eyes found Claire's. "We both were." And then Claire told him about being the nurse in the field hospital, about the man with the cut on his neck who wouldn't stop working, about bandaging a stranger on September 12, 2005, and marrying him a year later without ever knowing they'd already met. Ryan was silent for a long moment. Then he started laughing, carefully because it hurt, but laughing nonetheless. "What's funny?" Claire asked. "We spent 19 years married, but we've known each other 19 years in a week." Claire smiled through tears. "That's not funny. It's perfect. We were connected before we knew each other's names." He reached for her hand. "Some things are just meant to be, even the painful things." Madison showed him the letter he'd written to her before she was born. Ryan read it with tears streaming down his face, then looked at his daughter. "I'm not sorry I kept the secret from your mom." "I know, Dad. But I'm sorry I kept myself from you these last 6 months." "I'm sorry, too." They held each other carefully, mindful of IV lines and surgical drains, and something that had been broken between them began, finally, to heal. Dr. Reynolds brought the final pathology report that evening. "Your case is going to be studied for decades. This biofilm structure, it's never been documented before." Ryan managed a weak smile. "Lucky me." "You are lucky. By all rights, this should have killed you years ago. Why didn't it? Honestly, we don't fully understand. Your body built something medical science has never seen. A biological miracle." Ryan Mitchell left OHSU on October 1st in a wheelchair, 13 days after the first surgery that had nearly killed him and the second that had saved his life. Claire pushed him through the automatic doors into autumn sunshine that felt like a resurrection. Sophie waited at the entrance with a hand-drawn sign that read, "Welcome home, Grandpa," in purple crayon, surrounded by ladybugs she'd carefully colored red and black. Madison stood beside her daughter, and Brad was there too, all of them forming a small constellation of family that had been fractured and was slowly becoming whole again. The scar on Ryan's neck curved 4 inches along the right side, a permanent reminder of the glass he'd carried and the silence he'd kept. There was some numbness in his shoulder where nerve damage couldn't be entirely avoided, and his voice had a slight rasp from the breathing tube and the proximity of the surgery to his vocal cords. But he was alive, and in the aftermath of how close death had come, alive felt like victory enough. Home required adjustments. Claire set up their bedroom on the first floor because stairs were still difficult. Madison came by daily, the 6-month estrangement replaced by a closeness neither had known they were missing. Sophie's drawings covered the refrigerator and bedroom walls, flowers and hearts and ladybugs that were now symbols of survival rather than danger. Brad brought dinner twice a week, and the awkwardness that had defined their interactions since the divorce slowly faded into something easier, a new normal built on shared love for Sophie and grudging respect for each other's efforts at co-parenting. Physical therapy consumed October and November. Ryan worked to rebuild neck strength and range of motion, pushing through pain with the same stubborn determination that had kept him working through floodwater 19 years ago. His therapist marveled at his progress. "You heal fast for 50. Ryan touched his scar. "Had practice. Been healing from this for 19 years. In early November, Dr. Reynolds connected Ryan with a Katrina survivor support group that met in a church basement in southeast Portland. Ryan was reluctant. He'd spent 19 years not talking about New Orleans, and the habit of silence was hard to break. But Claire encouraged him. "You've been silent long enough. Time to speak." The group was small, 12 people who'd all been marked by those weeks in 2005 in ways both visible and invisible. They shared stories of physical injuries and PTSD, of nightmares that wouldn't stop and survivors' guilt that sat like stones in their chests. When it was Ryan's turn, he told them about the rescue, the glass, the 19 years of carrying New Orleans inside him. The silence when he finished felt heavy until someone asked, "You saved them." "The family? I tried. That's more than most did." After the meeting, a woman approached with cautious hope in her eyes. "You were in the 9th Ward, September 12th? Ryan's heart stuttered. "Yes." "Did you pull out a mother and 2 kids? Time seemed to stop. "Yes." "I was coordinating rescues that day. I remember your call in. You got them out." She smiled, and it transformed her tired face. "They survived. Mother and both kids made it to Houston. Last I heard, they're still there." Ryan broke down crying for the first time in 19 years. Great heaving sobs that came from a place deeper than the wound in his neck, from the part of him that had wondered if any of it had mattered, if the price he'd paid had bought anything worth having. 3 lives. He'd saved 3 lives. In December, Madison presented her father's case at a medical conference in San Francisco. Chronic biofilm-mediated dormant infection, a case study, drew a standing ovation and inquiries from 3 major hospitals wanting to collaborate on research. The implications were staggering. How many other survivors of Katrina, of other disasters, were walking around with similar time bombs in their bodies? By January 2025, Claire was testifying before the Portland City Council, advocating for a free medical screening program for Katrina volunteers. Ryan sat in the gallery wearing a Katrina survivor pin, watching his wife fight for others the way he'd once fought through floodwater. The council approved funding. The program was named Second Chance Initiative. On January 25th, the first screening day brought 47 volunteers to a community center for comprehensive dermatology, infectious disease, and mental health evaluations. Ryan volunteered to share his story, standing before strangers and encouraging them not to wait 19 years like he had. The results were sobering and hopeful in equal measure. 23 people were identified with potential chronic infections. 5 had suspicious skin lesions. 2 had confirmed latent bacterial infections. All of them began treatment. Lives were potentially saved because one man had finally broken his silence. On February 10th, a letter arrived with a Houston postmark. Ryan's hands shook as he opened it. The letter was from Sandra Williams, Jr., the 8-year-old girl he'd pulled from rising water 19 years ago. She was 27 now, a teacher, married. Her brother was in graduate school. Their mother was 56 and healthy. All 3 alive because a stranger had broken through a window and bled for them. "I never forgot you," she wrote. "Thank you for my life." Ryan showed the letter to Claire, and they cried together, holding each other in the kitchen where they'd shared 28 years of coffee and conversation and carefully maintained silences. "You saved 3 lives," Claire whispered, "and almost lost mine. But you didn't. And now you're saving more." On Valentine's Day, the whole family gathered around the dinner table, Ryan and Claire, Madison and Brad and Sophie, all of them forming a constellation that looked different than it had 6 months ago but felt more honest, more real. Ryan stood with a glass of sparkling cider, and the room quieted. 28 years ago, I married the love of my life. 19 years ago, I made a choice that almost killed me, but also kept me alive long enough to be standing here. His voice was rough with emotion. I spent 19 years carrying glass in my neck, but I spent 28 years carrying love in my heart. The love was heavier, and it saved me. He raised his glass. To second chances, to families that break and heal, to the wounds that teach us how strong we really are. They drank together as February rain fell soft against the windows, washing Portland clean, washing them all toward whatever came next. Sophie tugged on Ryan's sleeve. "Grandpa, tell me the story about the ladybug again." Ryan lifted her into his lap, careful of his healing shoulder, and began, "Once upon a time, there was a little girl who saw something nobody else could see. Outside, the rain turned to mist, and the mist to clearing skies. And through the kitchen window, the first stars of evening appeared like promises kept, like hope earned through survival, like the future they'd almost lost, and somehow, against all odds, found their way back to. Some wounds never fully heal. But sometimes, Ryan thought, watching his family gathered close and whole, sometimes they teach us exactly what we needed to learn, that carrying love is heavier than carrying pain, that silence can be both prison and protection, that the body knows truths the mind refuses to speak, and that coming home, really coming home, sometimes requires nearly dying first. Sometimes the wounds we carry aren't visible. Ryan Mitchell carried a piece of glass in his neck for 19 years, a secret from Hurricane Katrina he never spoke about, thinking silence would protect the people he loved. But that silence almost killed him. His story reminds us that the burdens we hide, believing we're being strong, can become the very things that destroy us. Yet there's profound hope here too. Ryan's body built a miracle around that wound, kept him alive long enough to finally speak his truth, to reconcile with his daughter, to discover he'd saved 3 lives he never knew about. The greatest gift wasn't the surgery that removed the glass. It was finding the courage to open that locked toolbox, to share the letter he'd written 19 years ago, to let love in instead of keeping pain locked away. We all carry something. A regret. A sacrifice we made, a choice that still haunts us, but we also carry love, and that's always heavier, always stronger. What's one thing you've been carrying in silence that might be ready to speak? Have you ever discovered that what you thought was weakness was actually your greatest strength? Share your story below. Someone needs to hear it today.